Okay, so for our first tutorial today, we're going to be learning how to draw a human eye. I'm going to draw here. You can follow along at home in your sketchbook, or you can watch and then try it as well. So to begin our drawing, we're going to start with just a really light circular mark in our page. It doesn't need to be very dark, and it doesn't matter if it's not perfect. We're going to cover up most of this anyway by the time all is said and done. This overall shape that's happening here is the overall shape of our eye ball, kind of sitting in the socket of our skull. The second thing that we want to put in are the lids, the upper and lower lids. So if you take a look in the mirror, you may notice that your upper lid peaks right smack in the center where we have this nice gentle arc that comes up and down. It may peak further to one side or the other. Those are little nuances that you want to make sure that you're trying to capture if you're trying to draw a likeness of either yourself or somebody that you're fond of, right? Where you want it to look like that person. Those can sometimes make big differences in our overall drawing. So for the sake of this drawing, I'm going to just arc in sort of a very simple, very consistent line. I'm going to put that little tear duct area in over here. And then kind of same thing for the bottom line. I'm going to also have a nice, just very slight symmetrical dip that happens here. And I'm going to include that secondary little rim that oftentimes we can see with our lower lid. We typically don't get to see it in the upper lid because it's covered by eyelashes and things of that nature, but we do want to have that little bit of waterline that happens along the lower lid. We can also indicate a bit of that tear duct area. That portion is important to put in a drawing. While we don't necessarily always put a ton of detail in that area, we do like to have that in there. Then the next thing that we want to draw is our iris. So unless you are sitting with your eyes wide open, kind of stretching out your lids, you won't be able to see your entire iris. So it's good to have the top and bottom portion kind of cut off by your upper and lower lids. So again, it's pretty rare that you would be able to see the entire iris shape happening here. Likewise, we're going to see a pupil hidden inside. And even if you have really dark eyes, you'll still be able to see variation between, again, that iris, which is the colored portion, and the pupil itself. So now we've got sort of a good start to the overall shape of our eye. Now we need to take a look and see if we can see a secondary crease line that's happening across the shape of our eye. So a lot of times we'll have what I would call a parallel line that just runs sort of consistently across the overall shape of the eye. Sometimes though, depending on the shape, so if you have an eye, for example, that is peaked like this, you might actually see a crease line that kind of disappears and comes back out the other side. Still, even other times you may have a shape of an eye where you don't have that curve happening really at all, where it's entirely possible that that secondary line doesn't happen. So just pay attention to your model for whether or not you're going to be able to see that happening at all in your drawing. And there's tons of variations. Sometimes you'll see just a portion of that secondary lid line. Again, sometimes you'll see it, but it'll kind of get cut off, and other times you won't see it at all. So lots of variations for the way that that will look. Then our eyebrow tends to come in from the corner of our eye, and then a slight diagonal off of the outer edge of our eye. How much space you see between the top of your lid and your eyebrow is really dependent upon the shape of your brow bone. So this is one of those observances where you can kind of measure the height from here to here and look and see, is it about the same to your eyebrow, or does your eyebrow sit low? Any of those things can oftentimes happen. So for the sake of this drawing, I again am gonna simply have a pretty uniform brow that happens across. You do want to think about not drawing in the eyebrow with really harsh lines. Tends to look really a bit strange if you have dark lines that are just filled in with a singular value. So you might have something kind of like that. So again, with men, a lot of times the brow will be thicker and will sit lower to the eye. So a lot of times you'll have a shape that's possibly more like this. And sometimes you'll have a really thin line, depending on how much your person plucks their eyebrows. So again, tons of different variations that can happen when you're drawing the human eye. So at this point, I'm going to put just a bit of value in on the underneath side of this lid. Just a bit. I'm going to allow it to be lighter out on this side. Same thing on the inside crease. A lot of times we avoid putting any value on the inside of our eye. We don't want to look like we have bags under our eyes or that we haven't slept well. But if you don't put any value in there, what tends to happen is the eye itself will start to feel really flat. So we want to think about having some value in here. You can smear a little bit with your finger if that works for you and you don't have a blending stomp. Again, I'm going to put a little bit of value on the inside of the eye here. Kind of soften that out just a bit. A little bit of value towards the inside. This will eventually turn into the depression that happens between your nose and your eye. And I'm going to erase just a little bit of those circular marks that you can still see that I don't necessarily want. And then we're going to go ahead and add our dark value for our pupil. Making sure that we leave that nice bright white highlight. And again, depending on the color of eye, you may have really dark eyes, you may have light eyes. Regardless, if you put in marks that make your eye look like it's got banding, so I'm always drawing marks from the center of my pupil to the outer edge of my iris. That'll ensure that I have a little bit of variation to the overall shape, and I get a little color variation as well. I can put just a bit of value into the whites of the eyes as well. Sometimes we forget that the whites of our eyes aren't actually white. They tend to have a bit of value. And then a little trade secret, we tend to have a bit of a shadow that happens all along this top rim of our eye that migrates all the way from that tear duct area across to the outer corner of our eye. There's a shadow that your upper lid creates, and if you capture that in your drawing, it looks pretty amazing. So I want to actually place that in so that I can kind of capitalize on that cool effect. I'm going to go ahead and darken that tear duct area in just a little bit because I sort of lost it just a tiny bit. Add a little bit more of that white of the eye. So you can see that little shadow really makes the eyeball feel like it's sunk back rather than sitting right on the edge of our lid line. I'm going to darken up this eyebrow just a bit as well, so you can do that too if you want. And then the very last thing that we're going to do is to add some eyelashes. So it tends to be that on the upper lid, and I'll draw this out here, that our lashes curve down and then arc up. So I like to think about them as like little Nike swooshes. But the thing that you don't want to do is number one, you don't want to do this where the lash is very consistent all the way across. Don't do that. That looks terrible. I would rather you leave the lashes completely off than to do lashes like that. Lashes tend to be thicker where they connect to your skin, and they gently taper into a really fine line at the end. They also are a little wily sometimes. So sometimes they'll crisscross and move in multiple directions. So it's important to not keep things really evenly spaced as you start to put lashes in as well. Lashes tend to be mostly gathered towards the center and outer portion of your eye, and they get really thin towards the inside portion. So as I put little lashes in, I want to think about, again, having a bigger concentration towards that midline and possibly just a bit towards the outside. I regularly just kind of skip putting lashes towards the inside here because I can get a little carried away sometimes with the lashes, and I don't want it to look too overdone, like I'm wearing, you know, gobs and gobs and gobs of mascara. And then for the lower lid line where you've got that kind of double rim, the lashes, and you can check the mirror to see that you can see this, tend to just kind of poke out from that secondary lid. And again, especially with the lower lashes, I tend to go with the less is more approach. So very few lashes on the outside in order to kind of complete that drawing. So there is our completed eye. Ooh, that gets a little snaky if I zoom in too far. But there we have one completed eye for our practice.